Hi, I'm Peter Kalmström, and I'm going to talk about the environmental impact of meat. The focus of today's presentation will be about 90% on the environment. I will, of course, touch a little bit of ethics, and as these days it's very hard to avoid the health bit. So I will touch a little bit on that also. But as I said, 90% environment. My main point of this presentation is that the action of eating animals, it's not an opinion, it's not a choice, it's an action. It's something that we do. That action causes resource waste. It wastes a lot of resources. And as I understand, you're all engineers, and I'm very glad to be invited. Thank you very much for that. So you all know about resource management. You know how to count resources, and that's what we're going to be talking about, the resource management of the planet, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about environment. We have a global environment, and we're going to talk a bit about how we're going to solve it. It also causes pollution. So that's the main two problems of all environmental issues, really. Either there's resource waste or there's pollution. Those are the two things that we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to prove in this presentation that eating animals is more resource wasting and more polluting than eating vegetables. So that's what I'm going to be demonstrating. But first, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Peter Kalmström. I am the editor-in-chief of the Swedish blog Supervegobloggen. I'm very lucky because all my family is vegan too. My grandmother went vegan when she was 99 years old, so it's never too late to change, of course. I'm also a writer. I've published hundreds, actually, of articles in Swedish papers. I'm also a member of a range of organizations, including the World Vegan Organization, of which I'm the president of the Spain charter. So you can often find me on the streets talking about the suffering of animals. And that's me. So let's move on to the environment. You all heard the news about a year ago that the European Parliament declares the climate emergency, and we were all hoping and looking for huge changes. The Guardian described this very well. Our house is on fire. That's what the EU Parliament decided. We have an emergency. So what are we going to do about the fire? Are we going to put it out, do something about it? Not really. We'll just, keep watching it burn, because that's what we've been doing the last year. So that's the background to where we are at and why things are happening so quickly, because we're not doing anything. Before I move on, I also want to make sure that we understand each other. I am not blaming the animals for the climate crisis. Göran Persson is totally right here. Of course, we're blaming the industry, of which he is a part now. He owns and sells meat cows now. He's also saying that we shouldn't shoot the cows. No, Mr. Persson, that's not what we want to do. We want to keep wild, free animals as much as possible. We don't want to shoot anybody. That's what you're doing, sir, because you're selling the bodies of those animals. Trump is saying the same thing to his followers, that the Democrats, they want to kill your cows. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not blaming the cows. I don't want to kill them. I want to keep all animals alive. We need the animals alive. That's the main problem now, that animals are dying out. Of course, we don't want to kill anybody. That's all right. So we're talking about the industry. We're talking about the pig industry and all the different things that are causing problems because of this industry. The pigs are nice animals. They're not to blame. Same thing with cattle. Cows, of course, are really nice animals. They're not to blame for anything. The way we keep them in captivity, the way we kill them, the way we transport them, that's what the problem is all about. We need more free-range grazing animals, of course, but we don't have to eat them. Same thing with poultry. We don't need to keep 50 billion poultry in captivity on this planet. That's totally unnecessary. Say sheep, of course, it causes a lot of land pollution, deforestation, and it's again not the sheep, it's the sheep industry. Fish industry, same kind of thing here. There's a lot of things going on in the water that we should care about, and we should leave the fish alone. But let's dive into the first environmental problem, the greenhouse gases. You've all seen this graph, I'm sure. This is the Keeling curve. It's showing the development of the carbon dioxide over the last 1,000 years. And as you see, it's been relatively stable up until the 1950s or so, when it started skyrocketing. And now we're up to 418 in June this year. Nitrous oxide is another greenhouse gas, very closely connected to agriculture. And when we're talking about agriculture, it's always a major part of that. About 70% of all agriculture on the planet is animal agriculture. So that's what we're talking about. That's a huge culprit in the big rise that we're seeing here in nitrous oxide. Same exact thing with methane. You see the same kind of curve, but you see the scale is different here. The methane concentrations in the planet atmosphere has tripled in the same time frame. Temperature been rising, and it's now about 1 to 1.5 degrees higher than it was previously in the last 1,000 years or so. As you see, it's been going up and down, but the trend is very, very clear. Sea level, same thing, it's been going up and down, but the trend is very clear. Here's finally a graph that's going the other way, but that's not good news. It's bad news too. Oxygen is going down, and as you see, that is being caused by us killing the oceans. We get about 50% of our oxygen from the seas and the other 50% from land plants. And what are we doing with the land plants? Mainly, of course, forests. We're killing them off. And what are we doing with the oceans? We're killing those off also. So this is our scorecard. This is our dashboard. This is how it looks. Of course, the question we need to ask ourselves, which of these problems should we fix first? That's a trick question. We can't. We cannot wait, first fix carbon dioxide, then we deal with methane, then we deal with temperature and so on. We need to fix all of them at the same time. That's why Greta, for example, Greta Thunberg, I'm sure you all know her, she's saying it's time to stop talking about what we should do to fix this. What we should instead be talking about is what should we stop doing? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. We should stop doing animal agriculture and fishing, of course, and hunting. We should leave the animals alone. Let's back a bit to carbon dioxide again. You've probably heard that carbon dioxide is going up and down. And yes, it has. This is 400,000 years ago, where the scale is 400,000 years. And as you see, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been going up and down between 280 and 180. So that's natural. Changes are natural. But as you see, the scale and the speed of the change is totally different as before. And why are we talking about 400,000 years? Well, that is the amount of time that the Homo species has existed on the planet. Homo neanderthalis, Homo sapiens, which we are, of course. So, as you see, we've never experienced this before. So this is something dangerous. And this level that we're at now, about 418, has never been seen for tens of millions of years on this planet. All right. And the main problem here is that we keep emitting. We keep releasing more and more. And as I said, we reached 418.32 ppm on the 1st of June in 2020. And this is, of course, causing global heating. And as you see, this is a graph showing 1884 to 2018. And as you see, the pattern here is very clear. Here's another one graph showing almost exactly the same thing. Here's a graph of 2018. And as you see, the average temperatures of the planet was much higher, most of the planet. In 2018, it was actually a bit lower in Sweden, but most of the planet was higher. And things like this happened. Snowstorm kills 7 and injures 80 in northern Iran. And there was a big snowstorm, snow wall even, that sweeps in a Turkish coastal town. If we see things like this in Sweden, it's more or less normal, but it's not normal that this happens in Turkey. It's also not normal that the Antarctica is warmer than Dubai in February. That's not how things are. These are graphs from the last few days, 15th, 16th, and 17th of November. And as you're seeing, it's showing current anomalies in Sweden. And as you see, most of Sweden is actually 10 degrees higher temperature than normal. But the big question here that we need to ask ourselves is, where are we going? We know where we are. We know the damage we've done. What are we going to do now? Well, IPCC puts out a bunch of future projections. And they are saying that if we keep all the promises that we made at the Paris Agreement 5 years ago, which, by the way, no country, including Sweden, is doing yet. So if we keep all those promises, then we'll reach somewhere around 2 degrees. If we continue as we're doing now, which is of course exactly what we're doing, then we'll each end up somewhere around 6 degrees at 2100. Notice though that that curve is not stopping. It's going straight up. It's continuing. And once it starts rising, who knows when it's going to stop? Nobody knows so far. The 126 poorest nations of the world, they know that they will not be able to handle more of a climate change, more of a global warming than 1.5 degrees. So they begged and pleaded and argued for, let's make the arrangement in Paris to 1.5 degrees. Of course, we know how the agreement went. It was 2 degrees, right? So this is, of course, causing lots and lots of problems. It's causing strange weather, it's causing food shortages, it's causing droughts, it's causing health problems, and lots of other things. And this is a rather interesting graph which we could spend an hour talking about. This is a projection on how the world will look at 4 degrees, which could be a few decades away. And as you see, Sweden looks great, right? So we don't have to worry. Or let's look at the rest of the world, because of course we are connected to the rest of the world. And as you see, all of Africa, or actually most of Africa, most of the United States, most of South America, most of Asia, most of Australia is uninhabitable desert. Those people that live there, which is currently around 5 billion people, they will not be able to live there anymore. So, will we welcome them with open arms in Sweden? I hope so, because they're going to be coming. The main problem with the future and this instability that we're starting to throw into the mix is growing. Our culture, all the cultures of the world, are based on growing. You plant something, you water it. In most parts of the world, you need to water. Then you wait, and then you harvest. And to do that, that's the basis of everything. And to do that, to do the harvesting at the end, everything needs to work. You need to have a reliable amount of water. You need to have a reliable amount of sun. Otherwise, you won't get your harvest properly. And that's the main problem, predictability. This has never happened in history before. We'll see a lot of disasters, of course. We'll see extinction events of animals. We'll talk a lot about that in a future slide. We'll see superstorms. These are things that we're already seeing. There was 30 of them this year, as I'm sure you know, in the Atlantic. Greenhouse gases is, of course, the main problem here. So what are we going to do to stop emitting greenhouse gases? Well, we all know that. We know that we should stop driving. We've been talking about that for what, 30, 40 years now? We've been doing subsidies, we've been trying with ethanol cars, with methane cars, and I don't know what, all the different versions, right? We should stop all the transports, including, of course, flying, which is about 2% of the emissions of the planet, about 10% of the Swedish emission. If we do all that, we stop all that, no more transports, we stay where we are, enjoy our local food, so on, no transports, no outside products, then we solve 13% of the problem. Great. But as you know, as engineers, that leaves 87% remaining. So of course we need to look at the other big culprits, and there's a lot of them. And the one I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is the animal industry. And it is at least 14.5%. So it's more than all the transports put together. This number, you can Google that number, look at it. There's a lot of discussion around that number. There are a lot of people who believe that that is much higher, up to 51%. And there are good arguments for saying that this is 51% of all the emissions. And there are lots of arguments saying we cannot get to zero without cutting out the 14.5%. That's pure math, of course. If you're going to get to zero emissions, you need to deal with the 14.5, you need to do with the 13, or whatever the numbers are. You need to deal with everything. Is it a good idea to continue releasing greenhouse gases as we're doing? Of course not. So let's look at food. We're going to have to eat, right? Here is the Swedish numbers for food. And as you see, cabbage, orange, tomatoes, potatoes, bananas, they release quite little carbon equivalents per kilo of food. And if you look at the meat products or the animal products, you can see that there's a huge difference there also. And you've all seen the commercials for chicken, saying that it's healthy, saying that it's environmentally friendly, lean, and all of those things. And yes, it is, if you're comparing it to beef, which is so much worse. But we need to look at the whole picture. We cannot close our eyes to half the picture. We need to look at all of it. And then we're looking, of course, at the vegetables, and they are so much better. Let's look at the bananas. They are, let's compare the bananas to the chicken. As you see, it's 12 times, even more than 12 times better to eat bananas than to eat chicken. And these are Swedish numbers. So that includes the transport of the bananas from the Canary Islands or the South America or whatever. They don't grow in Sweden, we all know that. So we transport them to Sweden, and still they're much, much better than chicken. They're 12 times better than chicken. So of course, cabbage and kale is a wonderful product. We should eat more of that. That's 3 times better than the bananas. So yes, let's go there. But let's first stop the big problem here. Let's stop the animal products. They're the big culprits. If you want to know more about these numbers, go to Our World in Data, and you'll find all the sources and a lot more detail of what I'm saying here. But you see, the trend is exactly the same. Moving on from greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to talk about water. And this is how we're used to see the planet. It's a big blue ball. Lots of water, no problems with water on this planet. But in fact, if you roll all that up, mathematically of course, then you'll see that that's all the water we have as compared to the size of the planet. We don't have that much. And most of it is actually salt water, which we cannot use for irrigation, we cannot use it for drinking, we cannot use it for planting. So what we're talking about when we're saying we need to save water is the fresh water, of course. And when we're talking about fresh water, the most precious resource of all is that water which is available freely in rivers and lakes. The rest of it we need to pump out of the ground, which of course uses a lot of energy, which we cannot afford to keep doing. So rivers and lakes, that's the tiny little dot north of Florida there, as you see. So our planet is blue, yes, but we have a lack of water and we need to take care of the water. That is a precious resource. So you've probably seen campaigns like this. You probably tried to do some of these things yourself. You shower smart or together or something. You fix the drip. You turn the tap off when you're brushing your teeth. And if you do all those things, on average, you'll save 660 liters every day. Brilliant. You should do that, definitely. We should do all of these things and more. But we also need to look at the big picture. And where is the water actually being used? Well, as you see, on the global scale, it's about 70% of water. Again, we're talking about fresh water. 70% of fresh water is being used for agriculture. It's a little bit less in Europe because it rains more here, so we don't need to irrigate that much. But in Asia, South America, and Australia, as you see, it's the vast amount of water. And this campaign, by the way, is from Australia. All right, so we've seen that 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture. All right, so let's look at how we're using water. Well, instead of on top of doing all those things with the shower and all that, we could just skip one egg. Or we should skip eggs also, because one single egg uses as much fresh water as one bathtub. So that's a lot of water, 175 liters. 1 liter of cow's milk needs 600 liters to be produced, because the cow drinks, of course, about 100 liters of water a day, and it also eats a lot of grain or grass, and that needs water. So if the water is not there, you're not going to get cow's milk. That's how simple it is. It varies a bit. The Indian cows, for example, they get by with 450, but as you know, India is a very dry place, so they can't afford to waste 450 liters of water either. And of course, as always, beef is the worst thing, all categories, so that is about the same as a swimming pool. 10,000 liters. Here's some more numbers, and as you see, there are some exceptions here. Avocado, almond are high, but in general, the vegetables are much, much better. So if you want to save water, stop eating animals. That's the simple solution. Is it a good idea to continue polluting our waters? Wasting our waters? Of course not. We should stop doing that. All right, let's move on to land. We have one planet. There is no planet B. I'm sure you've heard that one. Anyone going to another planet? Anyone? Nope. I actually signed up for the Mars One program, but that went bankrupt, so I'm going to be staying here on this planet for the rest of my life, most likely. And also, I'm going to have a lot of neighbors. We're going to be around 10 to 11 billion people. Look at Hans Rosling if you want more details on that. So we're going to be a lot of neighbors here, and of course, we need to keep all these people alive. We need to treat them well, right? They're human beings. They have human rights. So we should treat them well. So we need to think about how are we going to share this one planet with everybody so that everybody gets well taken care of. Well, first of all, we need to think about what are we using the planet for now. Well, 71% of it is water. We cannot yet live on water. It's very expensive and very difficult to do. So we only have 29% land which we can actually use. And we need that land. We need that land to absorb carbon dioxide. The only way we know so far to reliably take back carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is to let the forests be. And it's not actually just the forest. It's not just a bunch of trees. It is the fungi in the land, in the forest. And that takes decades or even hundreds of years to grow. So we need to keep these old forests growing, which of course is not what we're doing anywhere in the world, including Sweden, no matter what Gunde Svan says. We are cutting down the forests. We are destroying the wildernesses. And why are we doing that? Well, we're using it for agriculture. More and more land is being used for agriculture. This is again our world in data, and it's showing trends. And as you see, more and more is going towards the red. We're using more and more of the land for agriculture. So here's another graph, again from our world in data, showing the amount of land we're using for different things. So livestock and meat and dairy production is about 27% of the current land. So that's equal to both South and North America. The cropland, which we're using for feeding ourselves, that is only 7%. So if we stopped growing all that feed, stopped keeping all these animals in captivity, then we would be able to rewild 27% at least. Here's another graph on that. Please do dig deeper in this because it will not waste more land if we all go vegan. Quite the contrary, because we're already producing 83% of the calories from plant-based food. Most of the people on the planet is sustaining themselves on plant-based food, mostly, especially the poor ones. 63% of the protein and 83% of the calories. And as you see, we're using, there's a huge difference here. We're using 77% of the agricultural land to produce only 18% of the calories. And there is, of course, a deficiency of lots of things in the world. Mostly it is fiber. That's the big problem. And that only exists in plants. It does not exist in meat and dairy products at all. We do not have a protein deficiency, no matter what you read. You cannot find a protein deficiency ward anywhere in the world. People have lots of dietary problems, but protein deficiency is not a problem. A fiber deficiency is a huge problem. All right, moving on. Deforestation is a big problem, so we need to look at why is this happening. And here's a graph showing the different carbon dioxide emissions embodied in all these transports and cutting down of the forest. And as you see, there are a lot of industries involved. Here is the pulp and paper, it's the timber industry, but the other three, beef, palm oil, and soybeans. As you see, there's a lot of arrows going out of the remaining forest areas in the world. The Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, Indonesia, and Malaysia areas. Those are the areas where we still have jungle, rainforests. And as you see, palm oil, soybeans, and beef are the big culprits here. And as you probably heard, well, lots of vegans eat soy, lots of vegans eat palm oil. That's true. So are the vegans to blame for cutting down the forests? Well, they're not, because we are importing a huge amount of soy, and 90% of that goes to animal feed. It's easy to avoid soy. It's easy to avoid palm oil if you're a vegan, because it says so right on the box what it is. Swedish potatoes do not contain any soy whatsoever, and they're very healthy, and they're cheap also. Same thing with all the vegetables. They don't contain any soy. You don't give soy to the land to grow vegetables, but you do give feed to the chickens, the hens, and of course the pigs. You give them a lot of feed. A pig eats 7,000 to 8,000 calories, and most of that comes in most of the world from soy, because it's a very nutrient dense kind of food. So this connection that the beef eating customers are helping drive the Amazon deforestation is very, very clear. It's not a secret that is well buried. It's very, very clear. The facts are in. And of course, this is happening in Amazon, in Brazil. It's also happening in other parts of the world. Also, this problem is much, much larger than we previously thought. This article came out a year ago, in November 8th, 2019, and it says that the deforestation is actually 6 times worse than we thought before. We knew that cutting down the rainforest was a bad idea. Now we know that it's 600% worse than we thought before. And of course, this is happening also in Congo, in Brazil, of course, and in Indonesia. In Siberia also, the forests are burning. One of the big reasons is that we're cutting down the forest to allow for grazing. You've probably heard people talk about the forests and the rainforests and saving them, but you've probably not heard about wetlands or marshes. They are actually disappearing much faster than the forests, and they are very, very important for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of life there. There's also these wetlands work as sponges. So whenever you hear that there has been a flood somewhere in the world, look for, did they used to have marshlands around there? Usually that is exactly what has happened. They've taken away the marshlands, and what do they do with the marshlands? Well, most of the time they're growing feed, or they're allowing animals to graze there. So that's of course killing a lot of both animals and humans. So land usage, here we see a comparison between the different types of food. As you see, pulses, maize and rice and wheat are very low in land usage. Dairy and eggs are higher, poultry is even higher, fresh produce is actually rather high in terms of land usage, pork, and of course the animals that are actually allowed to go free, they need a lot of land, either for grazing or for producing their feed. So that is of course the worst thing to eat when it comes to land usage. Is it a good idea to continue wasting the one planet we have? Of course not. Alright, this slide is from 2016. And it says that unless we act now, in 2016, wildlife population will decline by 67% by 2020. World Wildlife Federation does this count every year where they try to count the number of individuals in nature, wild animals in nature. And now, the 2020 report is out, and we didn't act in 2016. And we didn't reach 67%. We actually got to 68%. So it went worse than they projected in 2016. So they're not alarmist. They're actually thinking that it will be better than it was. So we've lost 68%. And how many percent do you think is sustainable? Well, nobody knows, of course. It's like playing Jenga, right? You're taking out the pieces and you don't know when the whole thing is going to fall. So we need to stop picking out the pieces. We need to save these wild animals. Our closest vegetarian relatives are, of course, apes, and they are all being extinct really, really quickly. Our non-vegetarian predators, not so close to us really, but they are inhabitants on this planet, they're dying out really, really fast. And some types of animal, for example, water bird population has fallen as much as 90%. For example, in Australia here, we see lots and lots of examples every day on population. When they're being counted, the numbers are scary, really, really scary. Why are these populations dying out then? Well, this is species termination. It's of course very closely related to the termination of individuals. And as you see, overexploitation, climate change, habitat loss is important. We're taking away their land. If we're exploiting their land, if we're taking it for human use, then of course the animals are not able to live there, right? So a lot of that is going on, a lot of dying out, and of course we need to stop this. This graph is interesting. 96% of the biomass on the planet today is either our animals in captivity, our in citation marks of course, and human population. That's 96% of the biomass. The wild animals are only 4%. It used to be the reverse, only 10,000 years ago. That sounds like a long time, but it's not. In terms of planetary change, it's a really, really rapid change, and it's really, really scary. And again, remember that Jenga. Sooner or later, this thing will fall, so we need to stop picking out the pieces. Water shortage is, of course, another problem that's killing a lot of animals. And we talked about what are we doing with the water. Well, we're feeding it to our animals so we can eat their body fluids or their corpses. That's what we're doing with the water. We're wasting a lot of that for that. Of course, hunting. In Sweden, we kill about 1 million animals every year for sport. Of course, the hunters will all want to talk about those animals that get hit in traffic. Those are a couple of thousand. But we're killing millions. as a sport and as an entertainment. And there's never been in the history of mankind a single society that has been able to keep an ecosystem in check by using hunting. That's what they all claim, but there's no historical evidence for that at all. So is it a good idea to continue hunting animals for sport? Or killing the wild animals in general? Of course, it's not. It's a really bad idea. Moving on to fish. Fish, this is how we like to see fish, of course. Wild, free, swimming about, being fantastic in so many ways. The first thing I need to talk about when it comes to fish is suffering. When I was a kid, my parents told me that fish cannot feel pain. That was, of course, a lie, and they have apologized for it since. But they do feel pain. Just like humans, just like all other animals. It's a very basic function, avoiding pain. All animals do that. Some numbers when it comes to fish. About 90% of the big fish populations, like sharks, like tuna, all those other big fishes that we probably know about, dolphins also, of course, the numbers have decreased by 90% since 1950. 90% are gone. Also bycatch. You know, when you're trying to catch shrimp, as in this picture, it's really hard to catch shrimp. So you actually catch a lot of other things. That's called bycatch. 90% of the weight that you catch is bycatch when it comes to shrimp. And also the fisheries, also 90%. 90% are overextended or extremely overextended. That means that it's running out. 50% of the life on the planet has decreased since 1970. We've lost the individuals in the sea by 50% since 1970. And of course, that's a huge problem. And since we also get 50% of our oxygen, which we of course need to survive, from the seas. And this is killing lots of different animals in lots of different ways. Now we're talking about sea animals. For example, the clownfish, cute, losing Nemo fish here. That fish cannot adapt when the water temperature changes. So it dies out. And of course, coral reefs are hugely important in so many different ways. There's lots of life there, fantastic to see. And they're also protecting humans because they're breaking down the waves. That's what they do. That's where they grow. So they're saving us from storms. And of course, they're dying out. Also, we can see a lot of agreements. Our Princess Victoria is signing these left and right, and she's promoting them that now we can eat this kind of dead fish with good conscience. In fact, those agreements are not worth the paper they're written on. They are being broken. The agreements are being broken all the time. The animals are dying quickly all the time, and they're dying out more quickly all the time. And of course, fishing is also hugely resource intensive. See all the people, all the machinery, all the nets that we're seeing here. So it's using a lot of resources that we don't have to waste on killing fish. Also plastic, of course. About half of the plastic in the oceans is actually dumped fishing gear. If you ever fished and you got your line caught in the bottom of the sea, you were probably a good citizen and you dived down and you cut it loose. And you took the plastic and you recycled it, right? Do you think for real that the fishing industry is doing that? They are not. They are getting things caught all the time, and that results in ghost nets. And of course, plastic, as we know, it does not degrade. It will stay there for thousands of years if we don't clean it up, and if we don't stop putting more into there. All that bycatch is actually being given to hens, chickens, and pigs. And of course, minks also, that's another one. So we're using all of that to produce more animal products. So is it a good idea to keep killing the animals in the ocean? Here's one example very close to us. Whale hunting has been outlawed since 1987 in all the world. It's going on right now in a province of Denmark called the Faroe Islands. These manly men go out into the sea and they kill a couple of thousands of dolphins every year for tradition. Of course, there's no rational reason to do this at all, but this is happening every year, and the Danish police and military are protecting these fishermen, these persons that are doing this. So is this a good idea? Of course not. We need to save the animals in the sea and the animals on land. So Moving on, this was the end of the environmental bit. I'm going to talk about health a bit also. You probably know that antibiotics is very important. You've probably been saved of it. I know I have. I know my family members have been saved by antibiotics. So it's a resource that is really, really useful. It saved hundreds of millions of lives, probably extended lives, and improved the quality of life for a lot of people. So this is a resource that we need to take care of. Are we taking care of it? Of course we're not. We are actually giving 80% of the antibiotics produced in the world is being given to animals in captivity, like this pig here, of course. The interruption here, if we were actually in the room, was that doesn't happen in Sweden. Yes, it does happen in Sweden. Giving antibiotics in the feed to chickens is still allowed in Sweden. We use about 10 tons of active substance of antibiotics in Sweden. We're not even the best ones in Scandinavia. Norway is actually using less than we do. So we have nothing to brag about here. The 100 million animals that we're killing for food, the land animals that we're killing for food every year in Sweden, many of them have received antibiotics during their lifetime. And the big problem with this, of course, is antibiotic resistance. Bacteria emerges that are resistant to these antibiotics. And that today kills about 25,000 people in the EU every year. There has been no new antibiotics since 1987 discovered. So this is something that's been going on for a long time. And the big problem is here, when you get an operation today, you will always get an antibiotic because it's safer that way, of course. So if you cannot give antibiotics to a person that has been given an operation, then the operation will not be as safe. Now we're going to talk about AIDS, Ebola, and other pandemics. Of course, pandemics is something really bad. We know about that now, right? Everybody knows about that. Let's talk about the first, or well, one of the list of pandemics that struck the world, that is AIDS. Why did AIDS start? Well, almost all new diseases, and of course AIDS was a new disease then, comes from human interaction with animals. And how are we interacting with the apes? Well, we're putting them in captivity, but what actually happens in this case when it comes to AIDS was that people were actually eating apes. And that's what transferred the AIDS virus to humans in the first place. So, what should we do about this? Should we teach the Africans better table manners, to cook their monkeys better so that this doesn't spread? Of course not. We should ask them to please leave those monkeys alone. You don't need them. There are lots of better things that you can eat. Of course, AIDS killed many, many people. It's a huge pandemic, but there are lots more of them. SARS, of course, came from the poultry industry and killed some humans and a lot of birds. Millions and millions of birds. The coronavirus is the one we're struggling with right now, and we don't see an end to the coronavirus, and that's why I'm not in the room with you right now talking about this, because coronavirus has stopped all of those kind of things happening. It happened in a wet market. They were selling all kinds of animals and killing them right there. Of course, that is a growing ground for diseases. That happens all the time, different kinds of diseases. Now it was coronavirus, but this happens all the time. It's just a part of the pattern. Also, it's happening in Denmark right now, where Denmark is just about to kill 15 million minks because these minks and the humans that are interacting with them by keeping them in captivity are getting COVID, and they're not just getting the regular old COVID, they're getting a mutated version, which of course needs a new vaccine and all that. So the problem here is keeping the animals in captivity. That breeds pandemics. Pig pest is another thing. Swine fever is another thing. We remember mad cow disease. Of course, that is because we fed cows cadavers from other dead cows. That's why that happened. H1N1 was called the swine flu, and of course that came from the animal industry, started in Mexico, where they had literally millions of pigs crammed in, and of course that creates disease. These kind of threats are happening all the time. Almost every week there's a new virus, a new pandemic that is threatening us, and they're always coming from the animal industry if you look close enough. I've given you a lot of bad news in this presentation. I'm going to end with some good news. And the good news is that we, human beings, we are not vampires. We do not need to eat blood. We do not need to eat cadavers to survive. We can survive all of that. There's nothing magic in blood or cadavers. We can eat omega-3 from algae. Of course, fish do not produce omega-3. Algae do. So if we eat the algae directly instead of feeding the algae to a fish and then eating the fish, that is more efficient. Protein. As I mentioned before, there is no deficiency of protein in the world. We have lots of protein for all human beings. And everything contains protein, not just meat. Everything contains protein. If you're eating, then you're getting enough protein. Iron, a lot of that exists in green leaves. And of course, red beets is a huge thing. Fiber, as I mentioned before, fiber is a huge problem in the world. Lots of people are having fiber deficiencies. B12 is a whole nother lecture. We should take pills. We should all take pills, whether we're vegan or not, because we're destroying the soil of the planet. Where those bacteria in the soil that is producing B12 is dying out. So that's why we have B12 deficiency in vegans and in non-vegans. So we should all be taking B12 supplements. Vitamin D, of course, we have a lot of very nice mushrooms in Sweden, so we should eat those. Zinc is a good thing. We can get that in tofu and tempeh, for example. And on top of all these good things that we can eat, we can also be strong and healthy. These are pictures from a new documentary called Game Changers. And as you see, all these people are doing very well based on a plant-based diet. If you want to see more documentaries, if you want to dig deeper into the environmental impact, I recommend Cowspiracy. If you want to know more about health, I recommend Vegetated, Game Changers, and Forks Over Knives. If you want to know about the ethics, I recommend Dominion. And finally, if you want to know more, go to Google. Google these things that I'm saying. They're not secrets, they're not revelations, they're all out there. Nutrition Facts has all of your health questions answered, or the Swedish versions, Läkare för framtiden. Really good website, really good people working there. And also happycow.net gives you a listing of all the vegan restaurants out there. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. So you'll find lots of good places to eat. Thank you for paying attention, and thank you for listening. Have a good day.